Before you close your eyes tonight, let me take you on a little journey. Section 1. Petticoats and Pockets. Unseen, but essential. You slip into a rustling layer of skirts, none of them with visible storage. Yet somehow, everything fits. You're standing in a dim Victorian dressing room, thick with a scent of lavender starch and ironed linens. Your maid, her hands nimble and resigned, is helping you into layer after layer of fabric chemise. Corset, pad, petticoat, overskirt. The weight of the day settles before breakfast even begins. You tug on your gloves, fix your bonnet, and pause. Where, precisely, are you supposed to put your house key? There is no purse. There is no handbag. Not yet. What you do have is a curious little invention, sewn in secret, tied at the waist with strings and resting between the folds of your petticoats like a whisper of rebellion, the hidden pocket. It isn't flashy. It isn't embroidered. It's just there quietly holding your folded grocery list. A pressed violet from someone's grave. A scrap of toffee you'd rather not explain. You slip your hand through a carefully positioned slit in your gown's side seam and feel around until your fingers touch cotton. And that, dear listener, is where the fun begins. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Post your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where and when you're listening from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You shuffle forward into the long corridor of time, skirts brushing the floor, shoes creaking. In the late 18th and 19th centuries, petticoats didn't just add volume, they were portable architecture. The wider your silhouette, the more space you had for secrets. And yet, these secrets were ordinary ones. A folded note from a suitor, a needle. Sometimes, disappointingly, just lint. But they were your secrets. In a world where women's lives were routinely catalogued, supervised, and ironed flat like a starched cuff, the pocket was a quiet declaration of agency. You could keep something from the world, even if it was just a prune. Mainstream history tells you plenty about kings, battles, treaties, and reform bills, but it often skips the more, well, petticoat-tier concerns. And yet the pocket is no minor detail. It was the earliest form of personal storage designed specifically for women, tucked not into clothing, but under it, a secret by design. Now imagine walking through London in 1845. Horse hooves clatter, the air smells like coal smoke and damp wool, and you're gripping a handkerchief because the fog is real and rude. But you don't carry it in your hand. You slide it through a gap in your skirt and let it sit safely, invisibly, at your hip. These early women's pockets weren't sewn into the dress itself. That innovation, for better or worse, came later. They were separate accessories, often worn in pairs, tied with ribbon or tape around the waist and accessed through slits in the outer clothing. Think of them as wearable little satchels with the added thrill of invisibility. Quirky fact: some pockets were big enough to fit an entire roast pigeon. That's not a joke. In fact, it's a documented detail from the diary of a very hungry Victorian nursemaid. No judgment here. You do what you have to when dinner is uncertain. Historians still argue whether these pockets should be considered a proto-purse or something more autonomous. Unlike handbags, which demand attention and offer easy access to pickpockets, these secret compartments were personal and protected, shielded by layers of textile and modesty. In a sense, they were safer. But they were also a product of a society that didn't think women should carry anything visible at all. You walk differently when you have a hidden pocket. One shoulder shifts. A hand strays to check. You become the keeper of a mystery no one else can see. And of course, fashion, like everything else in history, was tangled up in class. Upper-class women might have silk-lined pockets with stitched initials and lacy trims. Working-class women, burlap, plain cotton, maybe a mother's name written in ink so faint it looked like ghost handwriting. But the feeling was the same, a private nook in a public life. And over time, the pocket became more than practical. It became symbolic, a place to tuck away the world, one small item at a time. So now, as you settle under your covers and the room around you quiets, imagine your own Victorian pocket. What would you put in it? A photograph, even if you had to imagine it as a daguerreotype, a charm, a tiny note in cramped handwriting, or just your hand, curled around the soft lining, holding nothing but the knowledge that this little space was yours. And maybe, just maybe, that's why it mattered so much. Section 2. The pocket's discreet rise in the 1600s, long before handbags strutted in. You tie a cloth pouch under your petticoat and hope it stays hidden. You wake early, the air still heavy with chimney soot and morning fog. And your first thought after tea, of course, is what to wear. But in 17th century England, this means more than color or fabric. It means strategy. Because long before pockets were a quiet rebellion, they were a simple necessity, rising quietly under layers of skirts and stays. It all starts around the late 1600s, when the first true tie-on women's pockets gained popularity, not part of your gown, but separate, a sort of fabric pouch worn underneath your outer garments and secured with strings around your waist. You tie it like an apron, only hidden, like a little secret tucked close to the hips. You may not have control over property or politics, but you do have a space, soft, stitched, silent, that belongs entirely to you. Men's pockets were sewn into coats and waistcoats by this time, but women's fashion offered no such courtesy. Instead, you made your own solution. Some pockets were plain, scraps of linen or muslin. Others embroidered with initials, lined with lace, or stitched with tiny floral scenes. Even something utilitarian could carry a little romance. And they were large, surprisingly large. Think book-sized. In fact, books were a common pocket item. Small Bibles, scandalous novels, recipe notebooks if it fit. It traveled. You could walk through a town square with 2 novels, a coin purse, an apple, and your embroidery kit all bouncing softly at your side, entirely hidden from view. The popularity of these tie-on pockets coincided with silhouettes that allowed for them. Full skirts, layered petticoats, overskirts with convenient openings. It was a veritable architectural paradise for fabric tunnels and secret compartments. And so women adapted. Where fashion failed, practicality stitched in. And here comes a quirky little wrinkle. Pockets were sometimes passed down through generations. Not the contents, though it's entirely likely someone inherited a dried flower or thimble, but the actual pocket itself. A daughter might wear her mother's linen pouch, the edges softened by time and the faint scent of long-dead perfume. Historians still argue whether these inherited pockets were mostly sentimental or economical. Some suggest they were simply reused out of thrift. Others believe they held emotional resonance, portable tokens of matrilineal connection in a world that rarely granted women ownership of anything else. Let's try it yourself. You wrap the long cotton ties around your waist. Knot them at the front or side. Then pull your gown over top. You reach through the slit in the skirt and there it is, the cotton cradle waiting beneath. You try placing a few coins inside, then a handkerchief. Then you get bowled a small plum. But pockets weren't always free of scrutiny. By the early 18th century, a few gentleman writers, of course, began to grumble about bulky shapes and distorted lines. Apparently, the very idea that a woman might be carrying something unsupervised was offensive to the eyes. Cue the slow, creeping tension between fashion and function, a tug-of-war that would last centuries. For now, though, the pocket survives. In fact, it thrives. In France, similar pockets appeared under the name poches, often with elegant stitching and initials. In Italy, pockets were known to carry herbs and even bits of coal to ward off bad luck. Across the Atlantic, colonial women in America stitched their own, usually less adorned but no less cherished. Your hands, tucked through your skirt, find the pocket again. The fabric is soft, familiar. It rustles slightly when you walk. You feel like a smuggler, but all you're hiding is a bit of dried lavender and maybe a boiled sweet. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes men noticed. Court transcripts from 18th century England include the occasional petty theft charge involving a woman's pocket. Not a purse, not a trunk, but a literal pocket stolen in a crowd, lifted clean off the waist ties by a deft hand in a market crush. Because when you carry something hidden, it means you carry something worth hiding. These pockets weren't just about storage. They were an assertion of personhood. They meant you had things you chose to carry, to conceal, to keep. That tiny square of fabric became a soft, swinging argument for autonomy. As you return to the quiet rhythm of your evening or morning, or mid-afternoon nap, imagine walking along a dusty London street. Horse carts pass. A flower seller sings something vaguely indecent. And there you are, strolling with a plum and a penny pressed to your hip, carrying a story no one can see. The pocket may seem boring, but only if you've never needed to hide a love letter or smuggle a cookie from church. The world outside might belong to the men in tall hats and endless speeches, but the pocket that belongs to you. Section 3. What's inside a lady's pocket more than lace? A rusted thimble, a bit of stale cake, and a miniature novel they all jingle when you walk. You sit down. Finally, after a long afternoon of carefully pretending to enjoy tea while not spilling crumbs on your gloves. The parlor is quiet except for the steady tick of the clock and the distant creak of someone else's corset giving up the will to live. You lean back, loosen your bodice a notch scandalous, and reach into your pocket. What's in there? More than you'd expect. Possibly more than you remember putting there. That's part of the charm. Victorian women's pockets were treasure chests, museum drawers, and junk drawers all at once. They weren't the sterile coin holders of modern denim. They were repositories of daily survival and mischief. You pull out a biscuit, slightly crushed, still edible. Next, a thimble, not yours. But it got in there somehow, maybe borrowed at sewing circle, maybe dropped in by a child who thought you were a particularly quiet magpie. Then a folded letter, not sealed, not signed, and slightly damp from the lemon you forgot to remove earlier. That's the joy of it, anything could live in there, and often did. Popular items included handkerchiefs, sewing kits, pin cushions, spectacles, calling cards, keys, combs, small change, sweetmeats, a twist of ribbon, dried herbs, and on one very memorable occasion in Derbyshire, a live mouse. Briefly, the pocket did not survive. Quirky fact. Some women carried miniature vials of perfume or smelling salts, yes. Those weren't just for dramatic fainting. The salts were real. and they burned your nostrils like peppery lightning. But in the oppressive heat of a summer carriage ride or during particularly tedious sermons, they did the job. Your pocket, stuffed with personal bits and pieces, became a kind of identity kit, a tactile scrapbook, one that shifted and rustled as you walked, reminding you that even in a world full of restrictions, this small space was all yours. Historians still argue whether these pockets offered true autonomy or merely the illusion of it. After all, carrying a key doesn't mean you own the door it opens. And yet, you had the key. You decided what to do with it. There's something comforting about that, and it wasn't just for domestic things. Some women carried weapons small, discreet, sharp. A folding knife tucked into the fabric lining. Not that you were likely to need it on your way to market. But you never know when you might need to cut a stubborn string of sausage or defend your bonnet's honor. Then there's the literary flair. Women who wrote, be it letters, diaries, or full-blown serialized novels often carried bits of manuscript in their pockets. Folded pages, loose phrases, sketches of an idea before it ran off. Jane Austen herself referenced pockets in her letters, and her characters often used them. Pockets weren't just physical spaces, they were narrative ones. Now picture yourself again. A soft rustle at your side. You feel for something. Your fingers brush paper, not the letter. No, this is a small notebook, leather-bound, pages worn, inside lists, thoughts, gossip, maybe a limerick or two if you were feeling spicy. Children, especially girls, imitated this habit early. Give a girl a dress with a slit and she'd likely beg for a pocket. The contents wildly unpredictable. A bit of string, a beetle, crumbs from something delicious that she wasn't supposed to eat yet. And always a secret. If you asked her what was in there, she'd smile, or lie. Because that's the whole point. There's a lovely, sleepy comfort in the idea that you could go through your day with everything you needed swaying gently beside you, hidden from view. The pocket became more than a container. It was a quiet form of defiance, a gentle middle finger stitched in muslin, even in literature. Women's pockets often symbolized inner lives, unspoken things, private hopes. The contents of a lady's pocket might reveal more about her than 1,000 letters of recommendation. And you, as a fictional heroine or real woman, could carry whatever you pleased. So tonight, if your bedside table holds a few scattered odds and ends, chapstick, coins, maybe a rogue safety pin, you're halfway there. That instinct to gather the small, useful things, to keep them near and private. That's pocket thinking, and you come by it honestly. Let your fingers rest on the imagined outline of cloth against cloth, folded at the waist, cool to the touch. Inside it, some fragment of your day still lingers, and that's a comfort no handbag can offer. Section 4. Pocket holes and the art of the reach. You develop the delicate skill of sliding a hand through a slit in 5 layers of fabric. The door clicks shut behind you. Outside, a dray cart rattles over cobblestones. But in here, the room is quiet except for the swish of skirts and the familiar tug at your waist. It's time for the delicate, practiced ritual finding your pocket. Not easy. You reach through the side slit of your gown, fingers brushing stiff petticoat fabric. Nothing. Just more skirt. You shift slightly. Try the other side. Ah, there. The opening to the pocket hole. You slide your hand in with all the elegance of a raccoon fishing in a laundry chute. This, dear listener, is an art form. The pocket hole, sometimes called a placket, was a discreet vertical slit in the side seams of dresses or underskirts. designed to give access to the tie-on pocket beneath. Sounds simple, but in practice, a logistical dance. Skirts shifted, layers tangled, pockets migrated. It was a game of gentle groping and polite cursing, all under a veneer of ladylike decorum. Imagine needing your house key while balancing a hat the size of a cheese wheel. That's the Victorian vibe. And still, women mastered it. You learn over time how to angle your hand, how to identify by feel the smooth tin of your snuff box, the crinkled edge of a letter, the familiar oval of your miniature mirror. It becomes second nature, like threading a needle in the dark or remembering which stairs squeaks on the landing. Mainstream historical texts often gloss over this kind of tactile choreography. But for women in the 18th and 19th centuries, it was part of everyday life. Finding your pocket was as routine as lacing boots or dodging unsolicited medical advice from men with no qualifications. And if you were pregnant, elderly, or wearing especially fussy formal wear, good luck. Some gowns offered no slits at all, rendering the pocket utterly unreachable, like hiding snacks in a bank vault with no key. Historians still argue whether this was due to evolving fashion trends or a subtle social control, one that limited women's independence by literally restricting what they could carry. But the clever ones adapted. Some added extra slits. Others wore their pockets slightly higher or lower, depending on habit and hip structure. And yes, there were accidents letters lost forever, biscuits crushed into oblivion, knitting needles poking out at awkward angles like rebellious antennae. Quirky detail. In some regions, women stitched little bells or beads to the edge of the pocket slit, not as decoration, but as a guide in the fabric forest. Imagine walking through a crowded ballroom and gently jingling to locate your coin purse like some kind of Victorian bat using echolocation. The pocket hole was a portal to possibility, but it also created a peculiar tension between visibility and privacy. A woman reaching through her skirts wasn't exactly a scandal, but it was noted, noticed, commented on, in literature and diaries alike. There are sly references to ladies fumbling through their petticoats, always with a wink. And yet, these brief moments of searching also became emblematic of something deeper, a kind of soft resistance. A woman with a pocket was a woman with tools, with secrets, with agency. You move through your day like a slow, rustling ship. At the baker's, you reach for your coin. At home, you produce a scrap of thread to mend a tear. At the garden wall, you hand a child a peppermint you happen to have on you. People think you're just being charming. You're actually a logistics expert. And this intimacy, the quiet knowledge of where things are hidden, creates a sense of personal geography. Your pocket isn't just a place. It's a muscle memory. You feel for the familiar curve of your key and know, without looking, that everything is where it should be. By now, as you lie back in bed and drift slowly toward sleep, let your hand rest gently on your blanket where your pocket would be. Imagine the cool fabric, the private jingle of a few buttons, the soft press of folded paper. There's something soothing about it, isn't there? You don't need to be seen to matter. You don't need to shout to carry things that matter. All you need is a pocket and a little practice finding it. Section 5. Criminals, pickpockets, and petticoat heists. Yes, someone will try to steal your lemon-scented handkerchief. And yes, it's a whole criminal genre. You're walking along a narrow lane, skirts brushing against hedges, hands tucked comfortably behind your back. But really one hand is occupied, inside your pocket, not fidgeting, just resting against the smooth feel of a brass thimble and the warm crumple of a folded note. You barely notice the shift in weight anymore. Until, of course, you do. Because not all pockets are safe. You're standing at the market. A commotion over by the fishmonger draws your eye. You reach to pay for a loaf of bread and wait. The coin you definitely remember putting in your pocket this morning. Gone. Stolen. Yes. Even a pocket hidden under 3 layers of skirts wasn't completely secure. In fact, these under-petticoat pockets were a tempting target for some of history's most agile pickpockets. Just because something was hidden didn't mean it was unreachable, especially if you knew where to look and had very nimble fingers. By the late 18th century, court records show a noticeable uptick in thefts involving women's pockets. Sometimes, the pocket itself was taken, strings and all yanked or snipped in a crowd. Other times, just the contents disappeared, without the woman ever feeling a thing. It's like a magic trick, but sadder and with fewer doves. Quirky fact. There was a documented case of a woman in Bristol in 1823 who lost a live frog from her pocket during a theft. The thief was caught not by witnesses, but because the frog leapt out dramatically at the constable's feet. That, you must admit, is one way to get caught red-handed. Victorian newspapers loved these stories. The idea that a criminal could sneak their hand under a lady's layers and steal a handkerchief without being noticed. Scandalous, oddly thrilling, and always sensationalized. But it wasn't just strangers in the crowd. Servants sometimes lifted items from employers' pockets while dressing them. Children borrowed biscuits or coins. Even husbands occasionally rifled through, claiming to be looking for the shopping list. Right. So what did you do? Well, some women got creative. Pockets with buttons. Pockets with hidden compartments. Pockets worn slightly higher on the waist, or closer to the spine. And the occasional decoy pocket, yes? Really. A cloth pouch filled with pebbles or crumbs, designed to distract or dissuade nimble hands. Historians still argue whether pocket thefts were more common than we think, or just more interesting to record. After all, court transcripts are full of such tales. But how many went unreported? How many women shrugged, blamed themselves, and moved on with one fewer peppermint? There's a strange intimacy in the act of theft here. To reach through someone's skirts, you must get close, closer than society deemed proper. It's not just crime, it's intrusion. And the violation wasn't always about the item stolen. Sometimes it was the unsettling realization that someone had touched the private space you thought was yours alone. It makes you wonder, why weren't women's pockets better protected? Why weren't they sewn in, secured, locked? The answer, of course, is fashion. And fashion, as we know, is not always your friend. But for now, let's imagine you catching the thief. Not with violence, no, with timing. You feel the tug, the brush of unfamiliar fingers. You spin. You raise an eyebrow. You retrieve your lace-trimmed pouch with imperial grace. You seem to have dropped this, you say, handing the thief your own pocket. Because sometimes dignity is the best revenge. Back in the quiet of your room, you untie the pocket from your waist and shake it gently. Just to be sure. 1 coin, 1 thimble, 1 peppermint, all accounted for. Tonight, as you drift off to sleep, imagine yourself in a crowded 19th century fair. Music playing, steam rising from roasted chestnuts, and inside your secret pouch, safe, warm, guarded, is everything you need. And if someone tries to take it, well, you're ready. Section 6. The Great Purse versus the Pocket Debate. Society ladies begin choosing between public style and private storage fashion columns weigh in dramatically. It's a Sunday morning, and you're sitting stiffly in the drawing room. A newspaper is folded on the side table, untouched. You've read it already. Everyone has. Because it isn't just a newspaper, it's a battleground. One where women's pockets are being debated like they're parliamentary reform or the merits of boiled beef. Yes, this is the pocket war. The rise of the handbag in the 19th century marks the beginning of a long and oddly dramatic struggle: purse versus pocket, style versus substance, ornament versus utility. You remember when it started first as a whisper among the fashionable set. Someone at Lady Grantham's luncheon showed up with a reticule, a tiny, beaded pouch dangled from the wrist by a delicate cord, barely big enough for a coin and a scrap of poetry. Charming, someone said. So modern. You tried one, once. Felt like walking around with a satin balloon. Beautiful. Yes. Useful. No. It swayed annoyingly. You couldn't do anything with your hands. And worse, everyone could see what you carried. A coin, a comb, a secret note. No longer secret. Tie-on pockets, by contrast, were blissfully private. But suddenly, privacy wasn't fashionable. Visibility was. Mainstream fashion writing declared the pocket bulky, outdated, and unladylike. Reticules were dainty, decorative, feminine. That word again. Feminine. The way they used it always made you itch. Historians still argue whether the shift to handbags was truly driven by changing fashion, or whether it reflected deeper anxieties. The Industrial Revolution had upended domestic life. Cities were growing, public spaces were more accessible, and women were out and about without chaperones. A visible bag was a visible presence. It said, I am here. I carry things. I go places. But visible presence came at a cost. With reticules came assumptions. If a woman carried her coin in plain sight, it must be the only one she had. Pockets implied preparation. Handbags implied dependency. And so the divide deepened. Magazines ran breathless features to pocket or to purse. Illustrations depicted stylish young ladies swanning about with jeweled reticules, while older or working-class women clung to their stitched linen pouches. One writer described tie-on pockets as ghosts of a bygone era, an elegant way to call them dusty. But you didn't give yours up so easily. You wore both. Let them guess. Quirky fact. In some radical circles, especially among early feminists, continuing to wear a hidden pocket became a political statement. A way of saying, I don't have to be seen. I have what I need right here. Even children weren't spared the debate. Girls were gifted tiny reticules for birthdays, taught to parade them like delicate trophies, yet inside their skirts, more often than not, they still tied on a rough cotton pocket, filled with sweets, marbles, or acorns. The truth, you can't raise a child on symbolism. You need something that holds snacks. As for you, your pocket holds the necessities of your particular life. A folded grocery list, a spare glove, a sprig of rosemary, sometimes just silence. You don't always need to fill it. You just like knowing it's there. And now, as fashion tightens literally, you feel the space begin to shrink. Skirts narrow, petticoats thin. The convenient pocket slits vanish from new gowns. With no explanation, you ask a dressmaker and get only a shrug. Out of fashion. Ma'am, right, out of fashion, like comfort, like logic. So you learn to adapt. You sew your own slits. Wear older dresses when you need to carry more than a halfpenny and a sigh. You begin to understand this is not just about fabric, it's about control, about access. You remember the newspaper on the table. That editorial headline, "The Modern Woman Needs No Pocket." You snort. Then you reach beneath your skirts, touch the soft edge of your stitched pouch, and know better. Tonight, as the house sleeps and the fire burns low, you lie in bed with a small smile. There is a debate raging in the papers, in salons, in fashion houses, but under your gown, tied quietly at the waist, your pocket remains. It is not gone. It is simply biding its time. Section 7, Sewing Circles, Smuggled Letters, and Secret Keys. You pass notes, smuggle radical pamphlets, and carry house keys like an 1840s James Bond. You're leaning against a windowsill, fingers drumming idly. But inside your pocket there's a letter, folded, sealed with a pressed thumb, and nestled between a small bottle of lavender oil and a slice of bread you forgot you were saving. Again, this one isn't from a friend, or not just a friend. It's coded. Because as much as pockets carried day-to-day items, buttons, ribbon, peppermint drops, they also carried messages. Quiet ones, urgent ones, dangerous ones, and women, often underestimated in the game of secrets, knew exactly how to use their hidden storage. Smuggled letters were a common item in 19th century pockets, especially among women involved in reform movements. From abolitionists in England to suffragists and underground educators across Europe, the pocket became more than a pouch. It was a courier's satchel, a protester's toolkit, a radical little envelope sewn in cotton. You'd never suspect someone carrying a pouch of lace and lavender to also be slipping a banned pamphlet under your door. But you'd be wrong. One quiet woman in a tidy kitchen apron might be carrying correspondence between jailed activists. Another might be smuggling a list of names through the bustle of a dress fitting. And in at least one confirmed case, a woman stitched code into the embroidery on her pocket, each flower petal a different letter. Quirky fact. In some cities, housemaids used their pockets to pass messages between lovers when their employers forbade any communication. One particularly bold maid was caught hiding love notes between 2 slices of bread, which she insisted was simply a very emotional sandwich. Historians still debate whether most pocket espionage was accidental convenience turned to opportunity or intentional from the beginning. Did the secret holding start out domestic and grow political? Or was it always about subversion, just wrapped in linen and respectability? Regardless, by the mid-1800s, authorities started noticing. Pockets became suspect. There were editorials about ungoverned female behavior and the danger of concealed intentions. You read one aloud at a sewing circle once, just to hear the shocked laughter. Concealed intentions. You all had dozens. Even in the home, the pocket was a little fortress. Women kept keys, literal ones, to cupboards, cellars, sometimes even the back door. If you had the key, you controlled the pantry. If you controlled the pantry, you controlled dinner. And in a world where women were expected to govern nothing beyond embroidery choices, that was something. You slip your hand into your pocket again, past the lace, past the handkerchief folded into quarters, and there it is, a tiny metal key, no bigger than your pinky. Warm from being close to you all day. It opens a drawer no one else thinks to check. And in that drawer, your journal. Your real one. Because the pocket was also a keeper of memory. Many women kept diaries or notebooks tucked away in their skirts. They jotted down garden schedules, grocery lists, overheard gossip, or moments they didn't want to forget. Sometimes, they wrote what they couldn't say out loud. Tiny thoughts, fragments of freedom, and yes, even ghost sightings. You pause there, because yes, ghost stories were pocket content too. One widow in Cornwall swore that her late husband's watch, kept in her pocket after his passing, ticked for 3 nights after his funeral. No mechanism, no spring. Just tick, tick, tick. She moved it to a drawer, and the ticking stopped. Call it nonsense if you like, but you'd probably keep the watch too, just in case. Tonight, as you lie in bed and the air hums with distant echoes of footsteps and whispers, imagine your pocket as more than fabric. Think of it as a doorway, one you walk through every time you tuck away a secret or retrieve a truth. You don't carry just things. You carry stories, and some of them aren't finished yet. Section 8. Children's Pockets, Lost Buttons and Baked Apples. Little girls lug around curious treasures, from doll shoes to frogs named George. You're in the back garden now, sitting on an overturned bucket that was never meant to be furniture, watching a child with sticky hands chase a chicken with no sense of boundaries. Your skirt is muddy, your hair's loose, and inside your pocket is a half-eaten baked apple, wrapped in wax paper. Because, of course, there is. Children's pockets, especially girls, were entire ecosystems. Unlike the carefully curated adult pocket, a child's pocket was pure chaos. Marbles, crusts, bits of string too short to be useful, thimbles with no needle, chalk nubs, and once, memorably, a slightly alive lizard. And let's not forget the ever-present mysterious crumb. No one knows what it was. Only that it's there. If you were a girl in 19th century England, chances were your pocket was both a hiding spot and a personal kingdom, small enough to forget, large enough to hold wonders. You might stuff it with rose petals and pretend you were a perfumer, or hide away the polished rock a schoolboy gave you before he got sent off to naval school for being insufficiently polite. Quirky fact. There was a documented case in 1889 of a girl in Kent who managed to store 4 snails, 1 crayon, 2 buttons, and an entire hard-boiled egg in her pocket during Sunday service. When questioned, she calmly explained it was for emergencies. She wasn't wrong. The joy of childhood pockets was that they weren't about utility. They were about curiosity. While adults carried items with purpose, children carried questions. What happens if I keep this worm? How many gooseberries can I fit before someone notices? Can a beetle live in a walnut shell? And for parents, especially mothers or nursemaids, inspecting a child's pocket at the end of the day was part treasure hunt, part horror story. Some items were returned to the earth. Others were quietly thrown in the fire. Occasionally, something would make you pause. A drawing, a ribbon, a note folded into shapes, too intricate for small hands. Historians still debate how much of pocket culture was passed down, whether children mimicked the adults in their lives or created their own world of storage entirely by accident. After all, give anyone a pouch and a bit of time, and things will start appearing inside it. The laws of pockets are strange that way. Children's literature loved pockets too. From Beatrix Potter's rabbits stashing blackberries to stories of fairies hiding in coat linings, the idea of small, secret spaces has always enchanted. It's the idea that something magical might be just out of sight, but still on your person. And in schools, pockets were often both blessing and curse. A girl with sweets in her pocket became a legend. A girl who lost her inkwell to a broken seam became a cautionary tale. One teacher wrote in a diary, "I have stopped asking what's in their pockets. It's always either food or mischief." Still, the pocket was a small kind of safety net. You remember walking home from school, pocket stuffed with chestnuts and your shoelace untied, the sky turning gold, a cold wind at your ankles, and your hand curled around the soft cloth of your hidden hoard. It didn't matter what was in there. It mattered that it was yours. Now, as you listen quietly in your bed, perhaps remembering the feel of woolen mittens or the click of your childhood boots on frozen mud, imagine the pocket you might have had, what you would have kept, what you might have forgotten and found again weeks later, crumbly and perfect. There's something deeply human about that, about finding a dried flower and not knowing when you picked it, or discovering a pebble you're sure came from somewhere important. That moment of rediscovery, that tiny spark of nostalgia. So tonight, if your pillow feels especially soft, maybe pretend there's a pocket tucked beneath it. Reach in. What would you find? A marble, a bit of string, a dream you weren't finished with yet. Section 9 Class Corsets and what you can afford to carry. Your social rank determines not only your hemline, but whether you own silver scissors or crumbs. The parlor smells like boiled cabbage and beeswax polish. And outside, rain patters against the glass in that soft, persistent way that makes everything feel heavier. You shift in your chair, skirts layered and warm around your ankles, and reach into your pocket not out of need, but habit. Your fingers brush a coin, a folded scrap of shopping list, and a bit of lace you forgot to finish hemming. If you're poor, that might be the only lace you ever own. Because in Victorian society, what you carried said a lot about what you could carry, and what you could carry well. That said nearly everything about who you were. Pockets, for all their modesty, revealed class in subtle ways. The contents of a duchess's pocket were not the same as a laundress's. One held a vinaigrette, those dainty silver containers filled with vinegar-soaked sponges meant to counteract unpleasant smells. The other may be a lump of soap, if lucky. And while your corset might cinch your waist the same as any lady's, what dangled from your hip beneath those layers told a different story. Upper-class women had pockets made from silk or fine linen, embroidered with initials or even lined with velvet. Sometimes they were perfumed. Often, they held trinkets, calling cards, snuff boxes, or those delightful but mostly useless miniature ivory notebooks. Quirky fact: some of those tiny notebooks had pages you could wipe clean Victorian reusable tech, if you will. All for jotting down guest lists or quotes that sounded important after 3 glasses of claret. In contrast, working-class women wore sturdy cotton pockets, often patched, sometimes mismatched. They held kitchen scraps, bits of coal for heating a kettle, maybe a house key, and sometimes, as one cleaning woman in Leeds recorded in her letters, an entire lump of cheese, wrapped in newspaper and carried for fortification. Historians still argue whether pockets democratized daily life or reinforced division. They gave everyone, rich or poor, a little autonomy, but they also reflected constraint. What could you afford to carry, and where were you allowed to carry it? For example, an unmarried seamstress might carry a pair of embroidery scissors, a pincushion, a few coppers. A married woman, a baby's pacifier, a scrap of bread, or a spool of thread for mending whatever needed mending that day. A cook's pocket might smell like rosemary and onion. A governess's like chalk and stale biscuits. And your station dictated not just what went into your pocket, but what came out of it and how. A lady might delicately retrieve a lace-trimmed handkerchief with 2 fingers, pinky poised. A servant might reach in elbow deep and yank out half a chicken leg. Both were practical. Only one was praised for it. Then there's the question of weight. If your pocket was too full, bulging awkwardly under your skirts, you risked being seen as careless, or worse, uncouth. If it was too empty, people assumed you were unprepared. There was a fine balance, like hosting a dinner party with just enough food to impress, but not enough to imply desperation. And yet, across class lines, the pocket remained a common thread. a tiny neutral zone, something shared, even if unequally. You, for example, might carry your sewing needles wrapped in muslin. The lady of the house carries hers in a silver case shaped like a tulip. Both stab just the same. There's comfort in that, as the fire pops softly beside you, and you nestle deeper into your bedding or wherever you're listening. Imagine your pocket once again. Not just what's inside, but what it says about you. Do you carry luxury or necessity? Do you carry scraps or tools? Do you carry both? Because in the soft rustle of fabric, in that barely audible shift of contents as you move, your pocket tells a story. And tonight, as the rain keeps falling and the house settles into sleep, you keep yours tied quietly at your waist, filled with exactly what you need and nothing you don't. Section 10. Fashion's Betrayal. The Vanishing Pocket Scandal. Suddenly, dressmakers say no to pockets, and you start sewing your own. Out of spite, the mirror reflects a woman transformed not by age, not by wisdom, but by betrayal. You smooth your hands down your new dress, admiring the cut, the crisp fabric, the tiny pearl buttons. Then, you reach toward your side seam, fingers moving by instinct. Muscle memory trained by years of subtle searches and find nothing. No pocket. You pause. Then you check the other side. Still nothing. This is how you discover that fashion has turned against you. The vanishing of the pocket wasn't a dramatic affair. It happened quietly, like so many indignities. One season, your seamstress says, it's not being done anymore. The next, even the plainer dressmakers stop including the side slits. And suddenly, you're meant to survive with nothing but a satin ribbon tied to your wrist and a purse no bigger than your palm. It's not enough, and it's not an accident. In the mid to late 19th century, as silhouettes slimmed and fashion embraced more form-fitting designs, pockets began to disappear from women's garments. Gone were the wide, accommodating skirts with hidden slits. In came smooth lines and bustlebacks that left no room for secret storage. And just like that, centuries of quiet utility were snipped away by the sharp edge of a new aesthetic. You complained. Of course, everyone did. But fashion columns scolded bulky pockets' ruin elegance. Designers muttered about cleaner silhouettes. And somewhere along the line, practicality was traded for polish. Historians still argue whether this was merely style evolution or something deeper. Some suggest the vanishing pocket was part of a broader cultural movement, one that tried to reshape, quite literally, what women could carry, keep, and control. Because when you take away someone's storage, you also limit their independence. You can't run errands, raise children, write letters, or deliver secret pamphlets if you've got nowhere to stash your things. And thus, the age of protest pockets was born. Some women began sewing their own slipping small cloth pouches into their petticoats, despite the trends. Others refused to buy dresses without them. A few crafty souls even invented undergarment holsters, worn like smugglers' belts, holding keys, coins, and ink-stained handkerchiefs close to the skin. Quirky fact. In 1881, a satirical magazine published a cartoon titled The Lady's Arsenal, depicting a woman lifting her skirts to reveal a pocketed petticoat filled with everything from a revolver to a roast chicken. The caption read, "Fashion may forbid, but the practical woman persists," and persist they did. There were even fashion reform groups, the Rational Dress Society being one who protested tight lacing, heavy skirts, and of course, the loss of pockets. They argued for garments that allowed women to move, breathe, and yes, carry things. Imagine that. You think about the last time you wore a dress without a pocket. How you kept reaching down anyway. forgetting it wasn't there. How awkward it felt to carry a bag, to juggle a parasol, gloves, and coin purse like a circus act. How exposed it made you feel. Because that's the secret truth no one writes about. Pockets made you feel safe. They weren't just convenient. They were comforting. You could touch your sewing scissors before a tense visit, finger a small charm stone when your nerves fluttered, carry a photo, a note, a vial of something sharp smelling when the world became too much. Without that, what do you have? A reticule, swinging like bait on your wrist. Open, vulnerable, stylish. Yes, but hollow. So tonight, lying back in the hush of your own quiet space, you run your hands along your sides, feeling for the ghost of a pocket that isn't there. You remember the weight, the swish of the fabric, the way your fingers knew every curve and corner. The loss stings a little, even now. But you are not without options. Somewhere in your wardrobe, you've saved an older petticoat, a little frayed, a little stained, but it still has that slit, that soft opening to the stitched sanctuary beneath. Tomorrow, you think you'll wear it again, because if fashion has betrayed you, then perhaps it's time to betray it right back. Section 11. The Pocket Police and Moral Panics. A woman with hidden compartments. Victorian columnists panic about ungovernable female freedom. There's a new column in the Ladies' Gazette, written with all the righteousness of someone who's never needed to hide a biscuit or ferry a pamphlet across town. The headline reads, "The Problem with Women's Pockets. A Hidden Threat." You blink, then you laugh. But it's a thin laugh, the tired kind. The kind you make when something is both absurd and alarmingly believable. Because you've heard this tone before. The one that insists too much privacy is dangerous. The one that casts suspicion on anything not immediately visible or controlled. Welcome to the age of the pocket police. Not real officers, of course, but social critics, essayists, and proper aunties who look at a woman's skirt and wonder what she might be keeping in there. And worse, what it might mean that she can. You reach down and tap your pocket reassuringly. It's still there. And yes, it holds a few items that would raise an eyebrow. Not illegal. Not immoral. Just yours. By the late 19th century, as women began agitating for the vote, education, and the right to exist beyond the parlor, even the humble pocket found itself at the center of a mild moral panic. What if women were using their pockets for politics? They were, of course they were, and not quietly. Suffragists often carried protest leaflets, pins, and ribbons tucked inside their pockets, pocket-sized banners, ready to be unfurled at a moment's notice. Chalk for marking sidewalks with slogans, bits of string to tie impromptu signs to fences. And yes, more than one arrest was made where the evidence was retrieved from beneath a suspect's skirts. Quirky fact. In 1907, a woman in Manchester was arrested outside Parliament. Her crime-dropping pamphlets from a second-story window. When asked where she'd hidden them, she simply replied, "Where you'd never dare look." The newspapers were scandalized. Sales soared. Historians still debate whether the outcry over unmonitored petticoats was sincere or symbolic. Were people genuinely afraid of secret chalk and spare buttons, or was it just easier to criticize pockets than confront the reality of growing female independence? Either way, fashion began to reflect the fear. Pockets vanished from many middle and upper-class garments entirely. Instead, women were given purses visible, dainty, and most importantly, open to public inspection. You reach for your own pocket now, fingers curling around a tiny pencil stub and the folded corner of a page from that book you keep forgetting to finish. It's nothing. Really? But it's yours. And that's enough to make some people nervous. Because here's the truth. The pocket is a private space. And in an era when women were expected to be completely public, always polite, always accounted for, always pleasing, the very idea of hidden storage was quietly radical. It wasn't just about what you carried. It was about the fact that you didn't have to show it. You think about that as you pour tea from the chipped blue pot with the dragon handle. You think about it while watching two younger women across the room, whispering and laughing and reaching, without ceremony, into the sides of their skirts. They're still doing it, still tying on pockets in the morning, still carrying tiny universes beneath their dresses, and perhaps the pocket police can clutch their pearls. Perhaps fashion can try to forget. But the pocket persists. Tonight, as the house darkens and the clatter of the day settles into stillness, imagine your own private space no larger than your hand, stitched along the edge, warm from your body heat. Inside, something delicate, something necessary, something defiantly yours. Because even when history tightens, buttons up, and closes ranks, you still have a place to keep your keys. Section 12, trousers, bloomers, and the forbidden pocket revolution. You dare to wear pantaloons, and with them, visible pockets spark both awe and outrage. You're pacing the hallway, your boots tapping softly against worn floorboards, and under your skirts swish your pocket bumps gently against your thigh. Only today, it's not hidden under folds of muslin and silk. Today, you're wearing trousers, scandalous, bloomers. To be precise, baggy, ankle length, cinched at the waist with a drawstring and blessedly pocketed. The year is somewhere in the 1850s, and the room is spinning with opinions. You've committed a minor fashion rebellion and, depending on whom you ask, a minor social crime. You wore pantaloons in public, and you liked it. This wasn't a costume change. This was a protest. Against tight corsets, against fainting couches, against fashion that made movement feel like a negotiation. For a brief moment in the mid-19th century, women, mostly reformers, suffragists, and general firebrands embraced rational dress, and with it, the sacred return of sewn-in functional pockets. No more fishing around your hip like a squirrel looking for buried treasure. These trousers had hip-level openings, real ones, sewn in, like men's clothing. Imagine, quirky fact. Early adopters of bloomers were often mocked in newspapers not for the pants themselves, but for their pockets. One editor called them distastefully utilitarian, claiming that no lady should need to carry her own pencil. Heaven forbid. But you carried it anyway. You marched through the street, bloomers swinging, pockets stuffed with the usual suspects: loose change, pamphlet, pocket watch, maybe a small apple. You were ready for anything, which is probably why it didn't last. The bloomer craze, like many early reform efforts, burned fast and bright. Within a decade, it faded under pressure. Social norms reasserted themselves like a tight corset after lunch. Bloomers were too masculine, too political, too comfortable. So they went back in the drawer. But the idea, it lingered. Historians still argue whether bloomers were a failed experiment or a necessary seed planted early. Did they really challenge the status quo or just serve as a fashionable tantrum in a sea of tradition? Either way, they happened, and they had pockets. That matters, because once you've had a taste of walking through the world with your hands in your own space, it's hard to forget it. It stays with you. Like the memory of a favorite coat or the feeling of pockets so deep they surprise you every time. Even as bloomers faded, the spirit behind them took root. By the turn of the 20th century, More and more women, especially in the working and middle classes, began demanding sensible clothing. Cycling skirts with secret compartments, aprons with clever loops, and yes, even dresses with modest side seam pockets. The rebellion was subtle, practical, sewn into seams and whispered through stitches. And every time a woman slipped a pencil into her hip pocket or folded a vote pamphlet next to her embroidery floss, she was adding another line to the story. Your trousers now are soft and well-worn, tied at the waist. You walk to the market, head high, pocket holding a small notebook and a stub of graphite. You see the glances, hear the murmurs, but you also notice something else, a young girl in a skirt watching you with curious eyes. She tugs at her mother's arm, whispers something. You smile. She's noticed the pockets, and someday she'll want her own. Tonight, as the world quiets and your breathing slows, imagine your hands in those trousers pockets, solid, stitched, familiar. Feel the weight of small things gathered over the day, the echo of steps taken in comfort, not constraint. The pocket may come and go in fashion, but it never leaves you entirely. Section 13: Colonial Pockets and Global Borrowings in India, West Africa, and the Caribbean. Women adapt their own pocket traditions with flair. It's early morning and already hot, the kind of heat that clings to your neck and makes linen stick to your back. But here, on the other side of the world from Queen Victoria's chilly parlors, the pocket lives on in new forms. You're in Calcutta, or Lagos, or Port of Spain. It doesn't really matter. The skirts are different, the fabrics are lighter, the culture distinct, but the instinct the same. You reach beneath your sari, your wrapper, your calico dress, and there it is, your pocket, your small, hidden certainty. Because while British and European fashion was in flux, conflicted over whether women deserved pockets at all, women in colonized regions were adapting the idea to suit their own lives, and often doing it better. In India, for instance, many women began sewing small cloth pockets into the pleats of their saris or into their petticoats, a tucked-away space for keys, coins, or religious talismans. The tailoring was local, the function universal. In parts of West Africa, wrap garments known as iro or lapa were often accompanied by tie-on underwrap pockets or side slits discreetly added by skilled seamstresses. Traders carried currency in knotted cloth bundles under their garments, often pressed flat against the hip. One merchant in Accra was famously known for keeping her measuring tape, chalk, and a peppermint in her side pocket in case the customer brought children. Quirky fact: in the Caribbean, particularly among working-class women in 19th-century Trinidad and Jamaica, the market dress evolved to include deep, sewn-in pockets, and not just for storage. These pockets were sometimes reinforced with extra layers of fabric, as if daring someone to try and reach in. Historians still argue whether these local adaptations were directly inspired by imported British fashion or whether they arose independently. But the result was the same: women, regardless of empire, invented ways to carry what they needed out of sight, but never out of mind. And what they carried varied wildly. In India, women might tuck away a vial of kajal kohl, a dried palm leaf, or a charm to ward off the evil eye. In Nigeria, a woman might carry a small mirror, loose powder, and the day's sales profits in coins. In Jamaica, it might be a bit of salt, a few sprigs of thyme, and a folded letter written in careful copperplate by a son now working in Boston. Pockets, in these places, were not symbols of resistance to fashion. They were extensions of routine, of labor, of survival. And yet, there was still power in them. Still that quiet comfort of a space that is yours and yours alone. You picture yourself now on a humid street, the air buzzing with flies and commerce. You haggle with a fish seller, toss a coin from your hidden pouch, and continue on. No reticule swinging like bait, no need to fumble. Everything you need is at your side, pressed close, protected by fabric and familiarity. You nod to another woman as she passes. You both know where the pocket is. No one needs to say it. And while British fashion magazines were mocking bloomers and declaring pockets a masculine intrusion, women around the globe were sewing theirs in tighter, deeper, smarter. They weren't waiting for permission. They were sewing autonomy into every fold. Tonight, as your eyelids begin to droop and your thoughts drift toward quieter places, imagine not just one pocket, but many, sewn in cotton, in silk, in waxed cloth, made by hands that worked late into the night, worn across continents, holding more than objects, holding stories, warmth, names, memories. It's a reminder that no culture holds the patent on practicality, and the pocket, humble as it seems, was never really British. Section 14. The Pocket Diaries. Gossip, Gardens, and Ghosts. Some women scribble secret thoughts in pocket notebooks. Some even claim they record hauntings. You're in a creaky wooden chair beside a low-burning fire. The cat is asleep near your feet, and the candle on the writing desk gutters ever so slightly. In your lap rests a pocket not attached to your waist this time, but held open like a tiny archive. You reach inside, not for a coin or handkerchief, but for something older, something made of paper and dust and maybe memory. A diary. Small, faded, bound in worn leather and tied shut with a scrap of blue ribbon. You untie it gently, because tonight we are not just talking about what women carried in their pockets, but what they left behind. All across the 18th and 19th centuries, women kept what we now call pocket diaries, tiny notebooks tucked into their skirts and sleeves, filled with notes, lists, sketches, prayers, poems, and more than a few unpublishable opinions. Some were sold commercially with pre-printed calendars, others were homemade. But what they all had in common, privacy, and inside them lived everything. A weather report, rain again, roof leaking in pantry, a grumble, Mrs. Thorne insists we take weak tea. Miserable woman. A garden note, plant carrots after the second full moon. Not before. A memory saw James in the lane. He did not wave. Pocket diaries weren't polished memoirs. They were messy, living documents of the day-to-day, jotted quickly, scribbled during errands, folded and worn. But they offered something no corset or comb could self-expression. Quirky fact, one woman in Yorkshire filled her entire pocket diary with her neighbor's gossip. Page after page of who said what to whom, who borrowed whose gravy boat and never returned it. She called it moral record-keeping. We call it legacy. Some of these diaries included pressed flowers, fabric samples, locks of hair. Others more mysteriously included sketches of symbols, stray names, even the occasional reference to local hauntings, yes, hauntings, in Norfolk. One diary recorded 3 sightings of the figure at the orchard gate. Another woman in Dublin noted that her cat stared at the cupboard where Ellen died every Tuesday at dusk. Historians still argue whether these spectral entries reflect true belief, poetic flourish, or just the quiet thrill of giving shape to the unknown. But the result is the same. These pockets, and the diaries they held, contain more than facts. They contain feelings, the secret thoughts no one else asked about, the worries you couldn't say aloud, the dreams you jotted before they could vanish. And the beauty is this: no one had to know, because no one could find them. You kept them hidden, not because they were shameful, but because they were yours. In a time when women's voices were often edited, softened, or dismissed, the pocket offered a stage in the diary, a monologue. You trace the fragile edges of a page now, candlelight flickering on faded ink. You read, woke with the thought that I will not be here forever. Planted rosemary. A simple sentence, and yet it settles over you like a soft blanket. Because it's not just the big history that matters, not just revolutions or reforms, but the quiet rhythms of ordinary life, the secret poems, the grocery lists that become elegies, the sketches of clouds drawn during slow church services. Tonight, as your breathing deepens and your room slips into shadow, imagine the pocket diary waiting at your side. Maybe it's yours. Maybe it belonged to someone long gone. Either way, you reach for it. You open the soft cover. You smile at the tiny, cramped handwriting. You don't recognize every word, but you feel them, because someone took the time to write them down. And someone, maybe you took the time to keep them safe. Section 15, Pocket Decline, Protest, and the Long Nap. You watch the pocket fade, but resistance rustles quietly under the skirts of time. The morning is quiet in that old, syrupy way. The kind of quiet that smells like sunlight on laundry and the faint tang of something just starting to burn in the kitchen. You move slowly, 1 foot bare on the cool wooden floor, and you reach automatically for the garment draped over the back of a chair. An older dress, not fashionable, not ironed. But when you slip it on, your fingers slide instinctively toward the waist seam. Yes, it's still there. The pocket, not a flashy one, not sewn in by any designer or offered as a featured benefit. Just a simple linen pouch, tied with a faded ribbon and hidden beneath the soft weight of your skirts. You tug it a little tighter today, knot the strings with a practiced flick, and feel the subtle swing of it against your hip. You smile, because the world may not know it's there, but you do. And that, in the end, is the point. The decline of the pocket wasn't sudden. It slipped quietly out of favor as fashion turned smooth and sleek, as silhouettes narrowed and waistlines rose. Designers favored symmetry. Seamstresses were told to keep the line clean, but the function never disappeared. It just got quieter, and so did the protests. Women kept sewing them in anyway. A little slit in the lining, a hidden stitch, a refusal in fabric. Quirky fact. In 1910, a women's magazine included a full tutorial titled, "How to Add a Pocket Where Society Says There Is None." It featured diagrams, embroidery tips, and the delicious final line, "What they cannot see, they cannot stop." That's the spirit. Historians still argue whether the pocket ever truly disappeared or whether it simply went underground, hidden in bloomers, built into aprons, nested in dressing gowns and nightclothes. The myth that women didn't care about pockets easily disproved. They cared. They still do. And you hear now, listening as the room darkens and your blanket folds more softly around your shoulders. You've probably felt it too. That small, sharp disappointment when a dress doesn't have one. That little thrill when you discover it does. Because it's never really about storage. It's about sovereignty. The right to carry things, useful things, personal things, trivial things yourself, without permission, without presentation, without explanation. You glance down at your old pocket, the one you sewed yourself after realizing modern clothing was more interested in pretending women floated than preparing them to walk. Inside a receipt, a grocery list, a lipstick worn to a stub, a key with no label, a scrap of paper that just says, "You did fine." You did. and so did the women before you, and the women before them, all of them with pockets stitched into their days, all of them carrying something the world didn't always think they needed or deserved to keep. Tonight, you press your hand against the soft fabric, feel the familiar bulge, and close your eyes, because pockets may not change the world, but they give you a place to carry the things that can. So now, dear listener, as your body settles deeper into rest, let your breath slow with the rhythm of soft fabric swaying in a gentle breeze. Let the sound of footsteps fade, the rustle of skirts quiet. The streets and parlors and back gardens of history dissolve like steam in the air. There is no need to search your memory for details now. No need to reach into your pocket for proof. Everything you carried is still with you, tucked neatly into the folds of your own story. Imagine that pocket again, small, soft, private, lined with threadbare cotton, stitched carefully, tied with ribbon. Inside it, warm from the heat of your hip, are all the things you didn't say aloud today. The thought you almost wrote down. The sigh you didn't have time to finish. A little bit of peppermint. Maybe a miracle. Let them stay there. For now, let them rest. The world can wait. You are not required to remember everything or carry anything at all tonight. You are allowed to be still, to feel held, to empty your thoughts like trinkets onto a nightstand, knowing that nothing important will disappear while you sleep. The lights are low. The room is calm. Your story, like your pocket, is full of quiet things that matter. And now, it is time to let them go. Section 16. The house is quiet except for the occasional creak of floorboards and the steady tick of the parlor clock. You're curled near the fire, darning a sock with more holes than hope, and your hand slips absently into your pocket. You weren't looking for anything in particular. You were just checking. And what's that? Your scissors. But not your scissors. These are blunt and chipped and very much belong to someone else. Ah, the silent scandal of the pocket rivalry. You see, pockets weren't just solitary. They existed in a social ecosystem, shared spaces, overlapping routines, and all the passive-aggressive borrowing one house could tolerate. Sisters, servants, cousins, friends, all tied by affection and obligation, and sometimes all tied to the same hook where one pocket might be left overnight, inviting temptation. In the domestic sphere, especially in multi-generational or multi-staffed households, pocket-related misunderstandings were both common and quietly hilarious. The lady of the house might accuse the maid of pinching her embroidery thread. The maid, in turn, might find her own pocket mysteriously emptied of ginger biscuits, only to discover a child had taken them for the doll. You didn't steal, you just borrowed, reassigned. Pocket diplomacy. Quirky fact. In 1874, a woman in Sussex wrote in her diary that her sister took my entire pocket for her walk and returned it full of brambles and gilt. They did not speak for a week. The pocket was eventually mended. The relationship somewhat less so. Pockets carried belongings, but also boundaries. One didn't rifle through another's pouch without permission unless you were under 10 years old or over 80. In which case, apparently, all etiquette rules were suspended. Historians still debate whether the dynamics of pocket sharing reflected deeper hierarchies or simply the unavoidable entanglements of domestic life. After all, a household was an intricate web of habits and half-spoken rules. And when everything from dried lavender to family secrets was stored in an apron or underskirt, accidents were bound to happen. Then there was the issue of pocket envy. You had the good pocket, the deep one, the one with the reinforced stitching and decorative initials. And you knew others noticed. At the sewing circle, someone might comment, "Oh, yours holds quite a bit, doesn't it?" Which was, in pocket language, a declaration of both admiration and thinly veiled judgment. And if someone had borrowed your pocket once, just once, you'd be quietly cataloging the contents ever after. You tried to be generous, truly, but sometimes you reached in and discovered your neatly folded square of camphor linen had been replaced by a crushed peppermint and a pine cone. And that's when you knew someone had been in your things. Still, pockets also created alliances. A sister might pass you a sweet or a needle threaded in advance. A maid might tuck a folded prayer into your apron tie on a hard day. Pocket friendships were real. They were built slowly, item by item, layer by layer through what was shared and what was carefully not touched. So tonight, as you settle into bed and feel the imaginary tug of ribbon around your waist, think back to the objects you've lost and found both literal and emotional. The things you gave away, the things you forgave. And if someone ever took your best scissors, well, let it go. Maybe. Eventually. Section 17. The boots are laced, the apron's tied, and the pocket, yes. The pocket is unusually full today. You're heading out, not to the market or the church garden, but to the edge of something uncertain. War looms, or perhaps has already arrived, and your quiet little pouch of thread and thimbles is about to become something else entirely. Because in wartime, the pocket transforms. It becomes a satchel for hope, a first aid kit, a message courier, a ration bank. Women, once expected to carry little more than lace and lavender, suddenly found themselves stuffing pockets with bandages, needles, paper scraps, and matches. The domestic world didn't disappear. It mobilized. Picture it, the 1850s, during the Crimean War. You're not Florence Nightingale, but maybe you're one of the countless women following behind nurses, laundresses, caretakers walking into field hospitals and makeshift shelters with nothing but your apron in your pocket. And in it gauze, a stub of soap, a note from home, a strip of linen torn from the hem of your last good petticoat. Quirky fact. Many volunteer nurses carried small pocket-bound journals detailing the conditions of their patients and sometimes of their own health. These notes, often smudged and folded into oblivion, now rest in archives, brittle and brown, whispering the daily grit of tending wounds by candlelight. Historians still argue whether these pockets of resistance, these quiet acts of care, should be seen as part of the military story or relegated to the home front. But what's certain is this: women went to war too. And when they did, they brought their pockets with them. During both world wars, the pocket returned to prominence in working women's uniforms, factory overalls, nurses' dresses, auxiliary corps coats all had pockets. Real ones, necessary ones. You can't carry your shift notes or emergency chocolate in a handbag while fueling aircraft. And during bomb raids in London, many women kept small survival kits tied around the waist: a candle nub, a coin, a whistle, a house key. One woman reportedly carried a tiny tin of tea leaves in case the rubble wasn't too heavy and we could boil water after. Because survival, like fashion, adapts. But the pocket wasn't just about crisis. It was about continuity. Amid chaos, it let you keep something of your old life, your spool of thread, your scrap of music, your child's note folded 4 times and tucked next to your pulse. You might still sew, still mend, still smooth the hair of someone sleeping. But now you did it in a war zone, and your pocket held the tools of both your old world and your changed one. Tonight, as you lie safe under your blanket, Listen to the imagined hum of distant wind, like planes in the far sky. Feel the weight of your pocket, its quiet readiness, its soft strength, and know this even in the hardest moments. A small hidden space can carry the weight of courage. Sometimes, a pocket holds more than supplies. Sometimes, it holds you together. Section 18. You're in the hallway again, half dressed, half late, and trying to find the note he wrote you last night. You remember folding it. You remember slipping it into your pocket. You remember thinking, I'll never forget this feeling. But now it's gone. Love and pockets. An odd pair, but strangely entwined. Victorian love didn't always happen with violins and violet-scented sonnets. Sometimes it happened in the margins, in the shadows of sewing circles, in the folds of aprons and the hems of underskirts. And sometimes it happened entirely in a pocket. You might never be able to say what you truly meant aloud, but you could write it, fold it, slip it into someone's hand or their coat or their pocket. That secret place where even emotion could travel undetected. You remember the first token you kept, a ribbon. Maybe not yours, a color that wasn't flattering, but you tucked it into your pocket and touched it 5 times a day like a charm. No one knew, not even him. Quirky fact. A popular courtship practice in the 1800s was to give a favor before departure, a scrap of embroidery, a verse, or a tiny pressed flower. The recipient often kept it in their pocket tied to the waist, wrapped in a handkerchief, or pinned into a lining. One woman kept a broken pencil from a poet she admired. She later confessed it never wrote a word, but always felt full of poems, and sometimes things were lost. Pockets frayed, knots came loose. Entire pouches fell, unnoticed, into the dust behind a carriage step or the crease of a pew bench. One documented story tells of a woman whose embroidered pocket fell during a Sunday service. Inside was a folded note, unsigned, reading simply, "When the lilies bloom again, so will I." The minister found it. It was never returned. Historians still debate whether such objects were truly lost, or if sometimes they were meant to be. Love is rarely tidy, and pockets, for all their privacy, are not immune to holes. But the act of carrying love quietly, secretly, matters. It means the emotion had weight, that it was too precious to leave on a dressing table or pinned to a chest. It needed to be hidden, close, safe, and if it disappeared, well, that's part of the risk. Even married women kept small mementos, a lock of hair tied in thread, a drawing of a child's shoe, a dried leaf from a walk neither of you talked about again. And what did you do with the things that hurt too much to throw away but felt too strange to display? You put them in your pocket. Tonight, as the lights dim and the corners of the room soften, reach into the quiet space at your hip, in your mind. Pull out something you've kept for too long, or not long enough. Turn it over. Feel its edges, whether it's still there or only remembered. It once meant something, and that's enough. Section 19. The teacups are clinking. The fire is warm, and someone is threading a needle with more determination than elegance. Around the room, soft chatter drifts in and out recipes. Husbands, the price of carrots. But beneath the surface, something else is being stitched. Because tonight's sewing circle isn't just about hemming petticoats. It's about pockets and protest. There's a particular kind of power in a room full of women with needles and grievances. It starts quietly. Someone says, "Have you read this?" and passes a folded paper from her sleeve to another's lap. Another nods and replies, "She's brave." The third just keeps stitching, but her fingers are tighter on the thread. This is how revolutions begin, with tea, small talk, and a pair of deft hands adding an extra pocket where none was supposed to be. Throughout the late 19th and early 20th centuries, sewing circles were not always the domestic havens they appeared. Often, they doubled as hubs of discussion about voting rights, working conditions, property laws, and education, and the pocket, ever humble, often became the symbol and the tool of that resistance. Quirky fact: one suffrage group in northern England embroidered protest slogans into the linings of secret pockets and wore them into public debates. If the room turned hostile, they reached inside, unfolded their quiet banner, and let it hang from their hands, silently stitched, softly stated. Historians still debate whether these acts were deliberate symbols or just practical uses of hidden space. But intent hardly matters. In a time when women were denied platforms, they made their own in thread, in cloth, in corners of dresses no man bothered to look at. Some pockets held petitions, others held money for bail. One famously hid a list of acceptable men to marry that included only those who publicly supported women's rights. It was a short list. The gatherings themselves were acts of quiet defiance, not overt, not shouted. Just women meeting regularly to create anything with their hands, while their minds worked steadily beneath the surface. The same hands that mended socks could, and did, mend societies. And of course, they taught each other to read, to sew, to speak, to hide things, if necessary. In some circles, young girls were shown how to stitch a pocket into their petticoat and told, "This is yours, not your father's, not your husband's, yours." Imagine being 11 years old and hearing that. Now imagine carrying it with you forever. So tonight, under the soft glow of your bedside lamp or the dark comfort of your pillow, picture that room. Not grand, just warm. A kettle steaming. Fabric folded in laps. Laughter you're not quite sure is about the stitching or something bigger. And the pocket, as always, being sewn quietly beneath it all. Because sometimes, rebellion doesn't come with torches or speeches. Sometimes it comes with a needle, a scrap of muslin, and a reason. Section 20. It's morning, and you're getting dressed, not in corsets or layers of petticoats, but jeans or maybe joggers or a dress you bought because it said it had pockets. You reach for your side seam and feel nothing. Of course, the curse of the fake pocket. Welcome to the modern chapter of this story. No longer tied with ribbon or hidden under hoops. The pocket has evolved or, depending on your wardrobe, vanished. Again. Even now, in the 21st century, the pocket continues its strange and stubborn journey through time. Some clothes have them. Some pretend to. Some suggest you don't need them at all. You do. And you're not alone. Quirky fact. In a 2018 fashion survey, nearly 70% of women said they'd refuse to buy a dress without real pockets. Yet only 40% of dresses offered them. And when asked why, some designers still mutter phrases like, disrupts the silhouette or adds bulk. Sound familiar? Historians still argue whether this pocketless present is fashion forgetfulness or a lingering symptom of deeper ideas about form, function, and who deserves utility. What's clear is that women have never stopped wanting pockets. The desire to carry, to contain, to have a private space that hasn't changed. And yet, there's hope. The fashion protest lives on. Indie designers now proudly market with pockets in big, bold fonts. Jumpsuits with zippers and side-stitch compartments. Jeans with hip-deep sanctuaries. Dresses that twirl and hold snacks. Even wedding gowns are getting in on it. A quiet revolution, stitched in cotton. And it's not just women reclaiming them. Non-binary and queer fashion has embraced the pocket as a symbol of freedom. Freedom to carry, to cross boundaries, to move through the world with more than a purse and a prayer. You might even say the pocket is getting liberated. What do people carry now? Phones, keys, a bit of gum, a lucky coin, a stone from a river walked beside, a worry charm, lip balm, grocery receipts, your own hands when there's nothing else to hold. And sometimes, nothing at all. Because the comfort isn't always in the contents. It's in knowing you could, that the space is there. You smile. Now, thinking of all the things once kept inside a fold of fabric, letters, pins, mint leaves, revolution. You think of how far we've come, and how far there is to go. You picture your grandmother's apron, your own jacket, the skirt you loved in high school that had real side seam pockets. You imagine them stitched end to end, like a timeline, like a history made not of battles and treaties, but thread and habit. And tonight, or tomorrow, or the next time you dress and find a pocket, slip your hand inside. Not to search, not even to carry, just to remember. Because what began as hidden cloth tied at the hip is now something far bigger. It's a question, a quiet insistence, a reminder that you, too, deserve to carry what matters without asking. So now, as you lie there, quiet, warm, the day folded away like an apron at dusk, let the last thread of this journey fall gently into place. You've wandered through candlelit parlors and crowded market lanes, past sewing circles and war-front wards. You've carried lace, lemons, letters, and love tucked close to the body, close to the soul. And whether your own clothes today hold 6 pockets or none at all, there's still a quiet place you carry with you. A place for the things that matter, a memory, a hope, a name you're not ready to forget. The story of the pocket isn't really about fabric. It's about permission and presence and the slow, stubborn art of holding on. So take a moment now to breathe long and deep, like folding clean linen into a drawer. Let the soft rustle of the past settle in your mind like dust in lamplight. Let your thoughts ease out of sharp shapes. Let them blur and drift, because the world will wait. There is nothing left to carry tonight. No errands, no duties, no pins or coins or little scraps of things unsaid. Just this quiet moment, this soft space, this hidden pocket of rest that belongs only to you. Sleep well, dear listener. You've earned it.